All right, we are live. Well, for those of you that are watching on Facebook or YouTube Live, on either of these streams, thank you for joining us today. My co-host, as you can see, is not here, Jem. He is dealing just with other things that are going on in life as they do. But no problem. We are still here and we're still going to talk about love. We are still going to talk about money, even though I am not a financial planner or consultant. That is Jim's job. But we will definitely delve deep into love. And today's topic is really about fear and how fear can kind of overcome your choices that you make, whether you're in a relationship or not in a relationship, as well as, access to money, or whether it's getting a new job or actually going out there and starting a business. Um, Obviously, as the world has been shifting and changing, things are different. So, this topic, I think, will actually be helpful, especially today, because the CDC switched their whole thing again. I was
Yep,
like,
they
what does
did.
this mean? I don't know what this means. um, and I'm in Florida, so I don't know what that means. Floridians don't really have rules anymore. So I was just like, what are we doing? And I was like, nothing. And I'm like, okay. But for the rest of the country, it will probably mean something. And that's my joke of the day. But my guest today is Shad. Hi, Shad.
Hi there.
Hi. And I always start off when I have a guest on the show. I'd love to hear people's journey in what they do and how they do it, and kind of how they ended up in the field that they're in. And if you've watched any of my past episodes, you know that I do not snoop on people's content. I don't really check people out. That may be a good thing or a bad thing. But I like to hear things organically. And I feel like we kind of lose that because of social media and everything else. So, Shad, I would really love to hear more about what you do and, how you got to be who you are.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Gwen. So I'm Shadman, though I've grown up having most people call me Shad. By day trade, I am an IT security professional, though on the side, I do a lot of blogging, some podcasting, just a lot of different content creation around personal development. And so, particularly, like I mentioned, I have a blog that centers around personal development, looking at these three pillars of health, human psychology, and sense of self, and helping it's really geared towards those in their mid 20s, early 30s that are navigating the uncertainty of life and just understanding what their identity is all about. And then I also recently started a podcast, taking a little bit of a break from it right now, called Between Us, which focuses on relationships. So very similar to you, Glenn, in terms of just delving deep into literally any and all relationships. I talk about like the relationship itself, romantically, in your business life, what have you, just to understand where are those little gaps that we have in life in terms of understanding how to connect with others in an authentic manner. And yeah, that's just kind of where I'm at today, just always trying to learn, grow, and develop on a personal basis. And I've learned along the way that I want to just share what I've learned through my journey with others, because I would have been someone who, if I could find those type of resources from others and learn from their journey, that'd be wonderful. So that's kind of just a little bit about myself and what I do and how I got here.
Love it. It's all concise. See, this happens when you talk to people who are prepared. But no, I love to hear people's kind of how you said, you are in IT, you're in tech, and kind of a lot of times you hear things where people in certain fields are not very emotional or they're not
Mhm.
very expressive in their words or communicative. Um, my partners in medicine, our conversations are very short sometimes, unless we get into heated debates, because that's just who he is. He doesn't express himself sometimes through words. Um, Not all the times, but most of the time he doesn't. But that's part of his personality. So he expresses himself in other ways. So I always find it fascinating when we see people who are either in medical or science, um, kind of very heady spaces, very analytical and logical spaces, kind of open up their heart and, dive deep into the other side of the brain.
Mm,
And
yep.
so guys can be sensitive too, for those that are watching. I know my audience is women, but hey, it's true. But we are talking about fear, and I feel like I said a little bit earlier that fear can either stop us from entering things, whether that's a relationship or even entering, business deals that might be profitable. What do you think is the reason people are afraid when they're in a relationship, or let's say you're starting to date someone,
Mhm.
and they're afraid to talk about money? Because I feel like that's the number one thing. People when talk about relationships, they're like, "Oh, well, how do you trust someone? How do you figure out if you're dating?" Nobody ever talks about like, "Hey, so are you broke?" Like, like that'd be a good question to ask. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, it's funny that you mentioned that because I think, yeah, like you mentioned, it's just a matter of there's a lot of when it comes to money, the one word that kind of comes to mind in terms of when you first ask about it, it's just there's just immediate shame. Whether you're broke, whether you're rich, it's just like you don't feel as if you're in a worthy position, no matter your financial standing. And so I think that's really the basis as to why people when they're in a relationship, they're just starting to date, even when they're a couple months into dating, they still don't even really broach the topic of money and personal finance. And and it's a real shame because it's such a wonderful opportunity to learn from each other, understand your own behavioral tendencies because money, I think the issue is people think all of us think that we have to have it figured out because it's thought of in such a logical type of numerical fashion where it's like if you do A, B, and C, you're gonna be, well on your way. When in reality, that's not the case when it comes to money. And I think that's the issue because people always think there's a formula to the success when it comes to your finances. And to a certain extent there is. I'm not going to discredit that, but at the same time, it's really a lot more psychological in nature and everyone has psychological slip-ups here and there. And
Yeah.
so I think that's really the basis as to why there's such a fear because people think if I'm broke, even if I have tons of money, right? You think, oh, I might get taken advantage of in a sense
Mhm.
because they're not dating me for me at that point anymore. Their impression of myself might change based upon the idea of this financial abundance that I have. So I think it's really that idea of shame
Yeah.
tied to the logical perception of personal finances.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Even like you said, tying it into, I feel a lot of times people tie the amount of money someone has or the perception amount of money that we think they have to their self worth, like you were saying.
Mhm.
So someone doesn't have any money, they're a bad person. Someone has a lot of money, they're a bad person. Like there's like, what is the middle ground or the number that like you have to
Right.
have where you're not a complete a-hole, but
Right.
you're not a complete loser. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. And even I think with money, especially in relationships, nobody asks if somebody was, you know, wealthy. My question would be like, well, how did you do that? Like, I'm more interested in,
Mhm.
like, well, how did you get this? Like, I need to write this down. Maybe I need to take notes. Like, like
Right.
you know,
Right.
rather than just like I'm making assumptions based upon
Mhm.
what we see. So that's a great point to kind of um, add about just in terms of money and people. The other thing I was thinking about is a lot of times, as you are talking about relationships, what is kind of the number one fear you think or you have seen people have when they're getting into a relationship? So I have noticed in people before they get into a relationship, their fear is trust, that
Mhm.
they're kind of putting everybody in a bag. My audience is mainly women. Sorry, women, but like you guys, a lot of times they're like, guys are horrible. They don't, they just want this type of person and they don't want me. And it's almost like a self fulfilling prophecy where you just keep dogging another completely gender out and nothing good ever happens, or you meet someone and you're like waiting for them to mess up. So it's kind of interesting that I see that a lot with women, or they're constantly talking about their ex and like what their ex did. So then the current guy's going to do the same thing as the ex. So what is kind of the number one fear that you see people have when they're getting into relationships?
Yeah, I would say it's that trust factor like you mentioned, but it's also really yeah, the trust in someone else to accept you for who you are without you having to because at the beginning stage of dating, right, you're always kind of, to a certain extent, manipulating little things here and there about your true sense of self to try and get some acceptance from this other person because of, past relationships. Sometimes you feel as if, oh, because I did this, now this isn't really going to work on, another guy, another girl, whatever the case may be. And so I think being able to truly let your guard down in terms of putting up those superficial kind of, I don't really like calling it manipulation to that, but more so things that you really are just tinkering with your personality, with the way that you like to go about presenting yourself that isn't truly authentically you. I think I think being able to really take that mask off is such a huge fear for a lot of people because they've gone through past relationships where they've seen, oh, once I've taken that mask off, everything falls apart. And then, like you mentioned, you think that pattern is going to happen over and over again because of past relationships, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point. So I completely agree, and I think it's, yeah, it's tough. It's just like it takes a lot of self-growth, self-love on your part to really accept who you are, and just the easiest thing that I've seen to overcome that fear is really for people to accept the fact that not everyone is going to like you at the end of the day. I think when you can make that transition and really have that sink into your mind, you then start to shed away a lot of those past recurring behaviors of adding little details here and there that aren't truly representative of who you are when you go about first dating someone.
Yeah. No, that's a great comment. I mean, again, I think sometimes, especially women, don't like to hear the harsh reality, and not everybody is gonna fall in love with you. Not everyone's
Mhm.
gonna think you're the greatest thing ever, which is fine because that would be very weird if everyone was like falling in love with you. You're not J Lo. I mention J Lo every single time I have this podcast, or I'm like sending out vibes that hopefully one day I'll meet J Lo, and be like, "What happened? Just what happened here?
What happened there? What happened there, JLo?
With all this craziness that you're doing, I don't know." She needs services. um, but no, I feel like a lot of times women are constantly fed, someone told me women are constantly fed compliments throughout the day, which is true. You look pretty, the dress is nice, shoes nice, your makeup's something's pretty. From the time we come out of the womb versus men, I didn't even realize until I started talking to guys and asked them, like, well, how many times do people come up to you and like say a compliment? And they're like, what are you talking about? So it's just rare that that happens. And I feel like that's kind of another question that I have in my head about how is the difference of fear depending on gender. So what are women kind of you see the most afraid of in relationships versus men? And is there a difference, or are they afraid of different things?
Yeah, I would say the bar, like you just kind of alluded to there, the bar seems set higher for women because they've gone through life being complimented, on a regular basis, and so they feel as if as soon as, a guy doesn't compliment them to the extent that they've maybe grown up with, it's almost like, "Oh, wait, is something wrong with me?" And then that leads to a down, like a super bad downhill spiral for some individuals. Whereas for men, I think the fear really is just it. I would say it's like just commitment overall for men. I think the matter of the fact is that men just, I don't wanna play into the stereotype, but also to an extent maybe validate it that it's maybe is true that some men aren't as emotionally in tune with themselves, and as a result, they can't emotionally connect with other individuals at a very deep level that a true relationship, a long-term relationship really, really needs. And so as a result, there's as soon as that emotional connection starts to begin forming, men maybe have a little bit more of a instinctive reaction to just pull away because it's not something that they're used to. And I think it's because it's like the reverse of women, right? Women maybe grew up a little bit more in a complimented, in a more cultivating type of atmosphere, whereas men, it was a little bit more segmented. They're a little bit more separated. So once they feel as if they're coming together in a group setting, it feels a little bit weird and foreign to them. And it's not to say like men don't like men when they get together with other guys at times, it's not that super deep emotional bond. It's like there's
Yeah.
like a little bit of like, you're throwing shade to a guy, so it's not like a super deep bond. So you're thinking maybe like, oh wait, you have deep bonds, don't you? To Yes, we do with like our other guy friends. That's true, but I wouldn't say every single like you know, like we say our bros, like they're not super deeply emotional relationships at the end of the day at times. So I think it is a little bit different for women. It's just like, oh, there's a separation being caused here. I was a little bit more nurtured in a communal sense growing up, whereas for men it was a little bit more distant just based on gender norms and
Yeah.
kind of what we've grown up. So once you get close, it's like, hey, this isn't what I grew up with. I don't know if I really want this. So that's
Right.
kind of where those two fears kind of differ in a bit.
That makes sense. I always make jokes like, you see guys hang out, it's like, "Hey, what's up, man?" Okay, and then they go do something, and women are like, "Oh my god, I love you. You're the best.
Right.
You're my sister." They're like, "What's that?"
Right.
It's like 45 minutes just to go somewhere because you're having all this chatter
Mhm.
before you sit down. So versus guys don't do that. So um,
No, not
yeah,
often,
I hope
yeah.
no, that'd be kind of weird. But yeah, so obviously that makes perfect sense. Women are definitely more um, sensitive. I'm thinking to my own self. I definitely have issues when my partner doesn't compliment me 15,000 times a day. And I usually point it out, and he's like, "Not again." like, what do you want? Um, Even though he's been with me for years, so it's not like he doesn't know what I look like. But we all get like that. We all have our insecurities. What would you say for people that do have, a fear of getting into a new relationship? Or just, I want to say, even a fear of just the way that the world is right now, kind of a fear of what's next because everything is so topsy turvy, as we mentioned earlier. And no one really knows what's happening or what's going to happen next. And some people are actually afraid of kind of moving away from COVID and kind of getting out of this pandemic and
Yeah.
hopefully, meeting people in real life or wherever you are in the world. What would you say for people like to kind of get out of that, or like what would be your motto or advice for someone that's just struggling in that aspect?
Yeah, I would say just for fear at large in general, what's helped me, and I think a lot of people go through this, is they just overthink every little minute detail, and that's what perpetuates the fear. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy like you were mentioning. And so I found really being able to, if you could do some mindfulness practices, whatever that may look like for you, through meditation, journaling, just naturally going for a walk with music, and like just shutting off your phone and just really enjoying nature, whatever the case may be for you, and being able to adapt yourself to shut off all that external kind of noise that's going on in the world, is really helped me, at least personally, from in a sense of just being able to understand what is within my control. And I think that's the key thing here for fear. Oftentimes we get so caught up in the things that are out of our control, and it really is just a lot. It's a waste of energy when you think about it. It's really being able to get into with what is it that you can control, and being comfortable knowing that other factors are going to be out of your control. And so when it comes to relationships, right, you don't necessarily know if someone's going to like you. There's no way to control that. There's certain things that maybe you can do to help your case in that regard, but at the end of the day it's going to be on that person to actually make that decision. You don't make that decision for them. And so I think when you take the pressure off, it's just so much easier. You're like, oh, I can control how I show up, how I present myself, hopefully in the most natural way possible. And the hope is that they'll like you. And like we mentioned, not everyone's going to like you. And when you come to terms with that, makes it super easy. And then I think it makes just generally going out and making new friends or dating a lot easier. And
Yeah,
same thing post COVID, I think it's really just coming understanding that everyone probably has a little bit of apprehension of getting back out there and meeting people, like,
yeah,
what's happened in the last year? I'm sure everyone's gonna have, to a certain extent, some like diminished social skills in terms of how they go about interacting. But then like that's the funny part, because then you're like, oh, isn't it funny how like we didn't talk for a year in person, and now here we are, and like we don't even know how to sit for 5 minutes and like have a conversation at a bar, when like a year ago, 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, whatever the case may be, we were out here like 3-4 hours just going like berserk, and it's just like a funny
Yeah,
starter to the conversation. So I think just understanding everyone's going through a similar sort of apprehension, the degree to which may vary based on people's personalities, but if you just tune everything, all the noise out, control what you control, that's how I go about at least attacking fear just in general.
I love that. It's a great motto. It's a great saying, just to tune the noise out. You guys learned anything today? That's the one thing you guys should make note of, as we wrap up the conversation. And you did make a very good point about how I feel everybody is awkward now in social settings. And then I find it funny because people ask you things based upon the fact that they know COVID happened. And you're like, well, for those of you that aren't following me, I went to the dentist today and I have not been to the dentist since pre COVID. And one of the questions was like, oh, when was the last time you went to the dentist? I'm like, pre COVID. And they're like, why? So I'm like, because of COVID. Like, so you're constantly trying to explain to someone, like, hey, I haven't done this because of this huge thing that happened to the world. But yet, if it's not, professional setting, like you said, everyone goes to a bar or restaurant. I'm not counting Florida because Florida's just been open for like months. But I have gone to other places outside of Florida and I have seen kind of the awkwardness, where I've even gone into coffee houses outside of here and like before when everybody was in mask mandates and social distancing and I forgot. So I was like, "Oh, am I supposed to leave?" And they're like, "Yeah, get out. Like don't stand here with your coffee. You got to go." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, sorry." Like I thought I could have a conversation. They're like, "No, just leave." So I actually went through the opposite when I would leave, where my social norms were more normal and everyone else was looking at me like I was crazy. And I was like, sorry, I'm from Florida. So that's why it's a little different. Um, but yeah, so I still think there definitely is, some apprehensive, let alone if you are dating. It's probably even more, I don't know, stressful. I think everybody needs a Xanax at this point. Maybe they should give that out free with the vaccine. Like, here's a Xanax and a vaccine. But thank you so much, Shad, for joining us today. We are actually ending on time, which I never do. So that is an accomplishment in itself. But before we go, I would love to hear more about kind of what you have coming up next, what you're working on for the near future. And please let everybody know where they can reach you and, hear more from what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. So you can, check out my blog, the podcast on relationships. All of it's on my website at my first and last name, shadmanrahman.com. I'm currently taking a little bit of a break from doing a lot of content creation to just kind of reset and give myself a little bit of a break after feeling a little bit burnt out. But hopefully in the next couple of months, being able to kind of get back into gear, get back onto podcasting, go on other people's podcasts and just generally talk about relationships and what I've learned. And so yeah, if you want to learn more about how to develop yourself on a personal basis, navigating these weird times, if you feel as if you're kind of falling into this abyss of unknown space, like I have the blog there for you to kind of share how I've gone about approaching those foreign situations, or just generally if you're interested in learning more about relationships, podcasts definitely have talked about everything from self to, personal finances to romantic relationships. So definitely check it out.
Perfect. All the information that we talked about today will be in the captions, including Shad's Instagrams, as well as the link to his website. So if you are not watching live and you want to go back, or you are watching live and want to go back, all this will be on the replay tomorrow. So thank you so much, Shad, for joining us today. And as always, we will be back here usually next Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, for another episode of Money Talks Love Listens. Thank you guys for joining us today. And thank you so much, Shad.
Thanks, Gwen.
Yeah. Bye, guys.